Dave Morris. He's Chris Castile. He's joining us via Skype from Washington. Chris, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Dave. How about yourself?
Doing all right. It's a rainy day there. Is that what I'm hearing?
It's we have actually had measurable precipitation for 15 days straight in
Wow.
Washington D.C. Yep.
We're looking for some good rain here, and it's the typical Oklahoma spring situation here where it gets a little severe sometimes.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you guys, it's wildfires, it's tornadoes, it's just one biblical thing after another there. This luckily is unusual. It's actually a record, but it's been no fun to be a part of.
I remember when we had like 30 straight days of precipitation a couple years ago here in Oklahoma. So it's that time of the year. It's also that time of the year in politics, and a lot going on, of course, with Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side, and Donald Trump on the Republican side, as they continue on their path towards the presidential nominations. We'll get into some national politics, but this past Sunday, you had a story about Oklahoma Representative Jim Bridenstine, some tension between him and the Oklahoma delegation. Can you set that up for us?
Yeah, there's just been this tension really over the last several weeks leading up to candidate filing, even before, really going all the way back to December between Bridenstine and the rest of the delegation about a vote on a big spending bill in December. The way it has manifested itself, in the last few months, is that they think that Bridenstine, these are all Republicans. We should say that for those people who don't know that the seven-person Oklahoma congressional delegation is all Republican. That there's some suspicion that he may have helped recruit or encouraged people actually to run against them in the primaries, in Republican primaries. I believe, it's not like James Lankford, the senator, doesn't have a Republican opponent. I don't think there's strong suspicion that the person facing Frank Lucas in the western half of Oklahoma, that was the case. But whether he did or not, the people who are running against these incumbents say, he did not recruit me. He had nothing to do with me running. It's what's remarkable about it is that they would even suspect him of it.
I was about to say, Chris, what's behind that? What built the suspicion, and what was it that built the suspicion among numerous people?
Well, there's been tension with Bridenstine going back, to almost 3 years ago, in the whole government shutdown. Bridenstine is a Tea Party Republican, who actually defeated an incumbent Republican congressman in 2010. Part of that kind of Tea Party wave post um, uh, Obamacare Tea Party wave, I should say 2012. And then he won re-election in 2014. He's about to run for his last term this year. And he was part of the Ted Cruz, the Tea Party members of Congress who pushed hard in 2013 toward the government shutdown, what was inevitably going to lead to the government shutdown. He worked very closely with Ted Cruz at that time. The rest of the members of the delegation, they really didn't want to go that route. They essentially went that route because, they were kind of pushed into it, but they never thought it was smart. They always thought it was a dumb strategy. It was never going to, accomplish what, Bridenstine and those people. Bridenstine also voted against John Boehner, was a big opponent of John Boehner, spoke out against the House leadership, whereas some of the Oklahoma members of the U.S. House are close allies of Boehner, were close allies of Boehner when he was the speaker. So there's always been this, and he votes against everything, every compromise bill meant to, keep the government open or, raise spending, to strike an agreement with the White House. Whatever you had to do to make an agreement with the White House, Jim Bridenstine's against. Some of these Republicans have had to kind of bite the bullet and vote for. So what happened in December, the Republicans couldn't pass a budget, couldn't pass their spending bills, until the end of the year. They roll them all into one big package called the omnibus. Excuse me. And what also got stuck in that, and that's like a $1 trillion bill, $1 trillion of spending in a single bill. Nobody has any time to read it, of course. And what they also put in there, a provision the Republicans put in, was to lift the decades-old ban on exporting domestic crude oil, something that the industry, the oil industry, oil and gas industry in Oklahoma really wanted. They wanted to start exporting crude. Got this huge glut of crude oil in the United States right now. They wanted a more market for it. Well, obviously, you got to, the Oklahoma members are in a bind on this thing. I mean, people like Inhofe, people like, Senator Jim Inhofe, James Langford, probably, the freshman Steve Russell, maybe Markwayne Mullen of Eastern Oklahoma, normally would not vote for a bill like this, But once you put that oil provision in there, they're kind of like, how can I not vote for this? Because President Obama was not going to approve that lifting the ban on crude exports as a standalone bill. He had already said it. Send it to me. I'm going to veto it. The only way they're going to get it passed is to stick it in a bill that he wants to sign. That's what they call sausage making up here. That's how legislation is done. There's no perfect bill. Everybody has to go along with something that they absolutely hate. So they passed the bill. 6 of the 7 members of the congressional delegation voted for it. I think primarily because it lifted the oil export ban. Bridenstine voted against it. And immediately, he and a lot of the opponents of it, a lot of Tea Party people in Oklahoma, said, look, this bill funds everything Republicans said that, spent the last year saying they were against. Funds Planned Parenthood, funds the Affordable Care Act, funds resettlement of Syrian refugees in the United States. The list goes on. So, that battle kind of started back then, and it was, waged publicly, whether it was on conservative talk radio or, in town hall meetings, basically with, a lot of Tea Party people calling the rest of the delegation, Republicans in name only saying they betrayed. And a lot of the candidates, these opponents these people that wound up opposing the Oklahoma congressman have used that omnibus as a central part of their campaign. Thus, the suspicion that Bridenstine was in some way behind recruiting them.
Chatting via Skype with Chris Castile, a reporter in Washington. We're discussing a story he had in the Sunday Oklahoman, which you can also read online at newsok.com, about the tension between Oklahoma Representative Jim Bridenstine and the rest of the Oklahoma congressional delegation. Towards the end of your piece on Sunday, Chris, you write about Bridenstine's opponent, Tom Atkinson, who said that he would have voted with the rest of the delegation on that spending bill.
Yeah, Tom Atkinson has a pretty long resume. A federal prosecutor and a federal bankruptcy judge, and then he started his own energy company, and he basically was, look, how can you not vote? How can you represent Tulsa and not vote to lift the ban on exporting crude oil? Tulsa's as we all know, a big oil town too. I mean, didn't they used to call themselves oil capital of the world? I think so. So that, that's his take on it, is that, that Bridenstine absolutely does not represent this district. And that, to some extent, Steve Russell, when I talked to him about that, he's the freshman congressman that represents the Oklahoma City area, meaning Devon, meaning Continental, really huge independent producers. They're some of the biggest in the country. He's saying, I've got 10,000 direct jobs in my district related to oil and gas production. Do I vote against this? Well, according to Jim Bridenstine and his supporters, you do. According to that faction of the Republican Party, you do vote against it because of those other things. And it's been a division in the Republican Party up here for the last 6 years, probably, since the whole kind of Tea Party emergence over spending and the Affordable Care Act, these kinds of things. That has been a constant source of friction. And it's just played out in the delegation this year over these opponents.
It's interesting. You mentioned the filing period at the beginning of this segment, and Bridenstine's going for his 3rd term, which he's indicated could be his last run at that. His party says that his opposition is trying to drain his funds, perhaps so that he would not go after the Senate seat, which I believe you indicate Senator Inhofe's seat. Is that correct?
Yeah, which we should say at the very outset, nobody really that I know, and I do not personally, after covering Jim Inhofe for over 25 years, think that he is ever going to step down, unless there's just some really serious health issue that emerges. Um, excuse me, I'm sorry. So that said, nobody thinks Inhoff's going to step down. He's got 4 more years left of his current term anyway. But this thinking, and, I don't want to use the word paranoid, but I think there's some paranoia on both sides in this, is that Tom Atkinson is running against Bridenstine just to make Jim Bridenstine spend money, spend his fund down, spend his campaign fund down to nothing. Because if he were to keep up, however much, a few $100,000 in his campaign fund, he could use that for a federal race in the future. And what they're trying to say is they're trying to get him down to zero. I mean, I can't say it seems far-fetched to me. I should just put it that way. I think Tom Atkinson's running because he doesn't think Jim Bridenstine represents a district. Probably doesn't like Jim Bridenstine, as a lot of people in the business community in Tulsa probably don't.
It's an interesting story. Again, you can read that in the Sunday edition of the Oklahoman or online at newsok.com, written by our Chris Castile. It's a good look at the behind the scenes of politics and just the discussion of politics and how things are done there. Speaking of tension, Donald Trump and Paul Ryan, they're set to meet tomorrow.
Yeah, this is going to be like some huge, this is going to be like Nixon goes to China or something. The media
didn't the Queen
build up to this. Yeah.
Go to China and say, hey, they were rude or something, and they heard it, and it's an international incident there.
But this is significant, and I think speaking of tension among Republicans, apparently there are some frustrations aired this morning in a closed door House Republican meeting about Paul Ryan, the Speaker, coming out last week and saying, I'm not sure I'm going to support, I'm not ready to endorse him yet. And apparently that caught a lot of House Republicans, off guard. A lot of whom had probably already come out and said, "Hey, I'll support the Republican nominee." And apparently, really caught Donald Trump off guard when Paul Ryan said, "I need to see him unify the party, and we need to, just hash out some things." And so this meeting tomorrow, which I believe is going to take place kind of off campus, so to speak, at the Republican Party headquarters. It'll be interesting. I mean, really, how could it not be when Donald Trump is involved? But it would be, it would be really unusual to have, a presidential nominee that was not supported by the top Republican in Congress, or the top member of Congress in that same party, I should say, put it that way. Paul Ryan is now second in line to be president, behind Joe Biden. So we're not talking about just some other, Republican or, some other Washington leader. He's huge. He's really important.
Talking about a very high-ranking Republican.
Maybe the highest ranking, really. I mean, if you
sure.
Trump might claim he is at this point, but he's not actually in an office.
Yeah, and that's probably part of the tension right there, is the two of them jousting for position. Perhaps they're going to meet at the off-the-record bar there in D.C. outside of the Capitol. Perhaps not.
It's a comfortable place.
It is a cool place, no question about that. Well, Paul Ryan may not be endorsing Donald Trump, but you spoke with J.C. Watts yesterday, and he says that Trump doesn't speak to him as a black person, as a conservative, as a person of faith. You want to go into the conversation you had there?
Yeah, in any category. Yeah, J.C., former congressman from Oklahoma, represented much of central Oklahoma. He was from Norman, represented Cleveland County all the way down to, Comanche County, same district that Tom Cole has now. Most of the time he was here. The first 2 years he was here, there was one other black congressman, a House member from Connecticut. But most of the time JC was in Congress, he was the only black Republican. And he spent a lot, of his the time that he wasn't working on legislation or whatever, he would travel around trying to recruit minorities to the Republican Party. As an uphill battle, as you can imagine. But, JC took it on, directed a lot of outreach efforts, to minority communities. And you know what he told me yesterday when I caught him at an event was he just can't believe some of the things that Trump says about minorities, and you know not just about blacks and Hispanics, he said, but even about Muslims. So he's very uncomfortable with that, and he says he just Trump just doesn't speak to him on any level. You know, one thing I neglected to put in my story is that JC supported Rand Paul in the Republican presidential race. You know, Paul, a libertarian, basically a libertarian candidate out of Kentucky.
You know, speaking of the Muslims, the newly elected London mayor Sadiq Khan came out and said this week that he'd like to visit the U.S. perhaps before November, and he didn't take kindly to Donald Trump saying, well, Sadiq, you can come over, but perhaps not other Muslims. To JC's point to your story, Donald Trump has certainly ruffled a lot of feathers.
Yeah, you know, and speaking of that too, I saw a tweet today that had Boone Pickens saying that he agreed with that. Have you seen that?
I
The
have not
Muslim
seen
ban?
that. Yikes.
You
It's
know, I don't know if we've got a piece on News OK yet about it, but I saw a tweet saying that Boone Pickens had endorsed Trump and said he agreed with the Muslim ban.
Well, it's very interesting as we head towards the November elections. Still a lot going on, a lot of headlines being made. And our man in Washington, Chris Castile, is on top of it all. Chris, as always, we appreciate the 10, 15, 20 minutes that we get to spend with you every week discussing this in detail. And great job covering it.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Go Thunder.
Yes, absolutely. Things are looking pretty good for the Thunder. Tomorrow night will be interesting. More political coverage from Chris Castile can be found on newsok.com and, of course, in the Oklahoman.